part two of the 455 Buick build. Between the last video and this one, we did a little bit of work on this thing. We went ahead and cleaned up the block, and we got the block you can see is right here on the hoist. We went ahead and cleaned up the block, magnafluxed it, checked it for cracks. We actually had this block sonic checked because the 455 Buicks, it's a lightweight block, and pretty much everybody in the industry that I know, that I associate with, and that I talk to said you should probably get the block sonic checked because it is a very thin casting. The 455 Buick was a different sort of an engine because it was what they call the lightweight casting. So the casting itself, the block itself, is the cylinders and the inner webbing of the block and so forth is pretty thin. And they did have a problem with core shifts. So anytime you bore the block out, it's probably a good idea to get it sonic checked just to make sure you don't have any core shift or thin cylinders. This one checked out really good. We didn't have any issues with it. So once that was done, of course, we went ahead and bored the cylinders 30 thousandths over. And I've got some parts here. I've got the engine kit that we're going to use, and the pistons and so forth. And I kind of want to walk you through the parts that we chose for this build. What we're doing with this engine is we are trying to duplicate the Stage 1 engine. Now the Stage 1 engine, it had somewhere in the area of 380 horsepower, 390, something like that. I don't know the exact number. That's really not what we're concerned with here. What was amazing about the Stage 1 Buick 455 is that it actually only weighs just slightly more than a small block Chevy because it's this lightweight casting, but it displaces 455 cubic inches, and the Stage 1 version had over 500 foot-pounds of torque from the factory, which is phenomenal. So we're trying to duplicate that, and so what we did is we chose parts that actually are a little better than what the factory had in it, because the factory had just plain old cast pistons in it. We went with a hyper-eutectic piston, which is an upgrade, as you know, from the cast piston. And also, we're going to go with, we're going to get rid of the factory 4-barrel intake. It is a factory 4-barrel engine, but the 4-barrel manifold, and I'll show that to you here in a little bit, that we took off is just ridiculously heavy. And they don't really flow as well as some of the aftermarket manifolds, specifically Edelbrock, which is where we're going to get the manifold for this engine. So we're going to change out the manifold with an Edelbrock. We're going to upgrade the valves in the head. We're not going to go with a larger valve than the Stage 1. The Stage 1 did have a large valve, and we're going to duplicate that. But we're going to go with a higher grade of material, a better grade of valve. And then, of course, the camshaft. I was actually surprised because, I haven't done a lot of Buick stuff. I've done a few of these in the past, but I looked up the original Stage 1 cam specs, and the camshaft that they had in that motor was actually really kind of small, at least compared to what I'm used to. So the lift wasn't very high on it. The duration wasn't too big at all. It was very close to what we would consider to be like an RV type cam today. So we're going to bump the cam specs up a little bit. We're not going to get real crazy with it, but we are going to go a little bit. And of course, what you have to realize is that the cam technology has improved greatly since 1971 when this engine was originally built. So I'm looking at cam specs from 1971, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, it's amazing the thing actually made 500 foot-pounds of torque with that cam. So I think we will easily be able to hit the 500 foot-pound torque and probably surpass that, because we're going to have a better flowing intake. We're going to probably put a better carburetor on it than it had from the factory, and we're going to definitely put a better intake on it, and we're going to massage the heads a little bit. We'll probably do a little bit of clean up on the intake ports, maybe the roof of the ports and so forth, just to make this thing, flow as good as we possibly can. We're not going with any kind of an aftermarket head or anything like that. I do have a set of Stage 1 heads. This engine originally did not have the Stage 1 heads, even though it was out of a 71. So I actually got another set of heads that we purchased for this, and they are one of the casting numbers that they used for the Stage 1 build, which, according to everything that I've read and GM, they did flow about 15% better than just the average 455 Buick head. So let me walk you through some of these parts, and so you can kind of get a feel for what we're doing. And if you want to, if you're duplicating this, if you're going to build one of these, there's a few things that you probably should know, and there's some options that you have. I mean, you have a choice. You know, you could go all out and go with forged pistons. We decided not to do that on this one, just because of budget constraints and the fact that, you know, this is a classic car restoration, and it's not going to be really doing any serious drag racing. I mean, they may take it to the strip once in a while, but it's not a race car. No nitrous or anything like that. So let's get started. Okay, so this is our master engine kit, minus a few parts, of course. So we went ahead. It's always a good idea to go with brass core plugs. So we went ahead and went with the brass core plugs. Cleveite bearings. Now our crankshaft, which is right over here, we did have the crankshaft cut 10 thousandths under, so it's a 1010 crank, and of course the block itself. Now we pre-painted this before we put the plugs in and so forth. That's Buick red there. We did, and of course this is not clean. It's been sitting around for about a month with spray oil on it. So we're going to have to obviously final wash this thing and double check all our clearances and everything. So, but the cylinders, we did bore and hone them to 30 thousandths over, and the pistons that we chose here is a sealed power hyper-eutectic piston. Now, you know, you might notice that there's a pretty significant dish in this piston, and when I started looking for pistons on these things, you know, a lot of times we'll try to find a flat top piston, just so we can, you know, get the compression up a little bit. And I noticed that all of the aftermarket pistons were pretty much either a dish piston or just the hardcore all-out forged pistons with a big dome on them. So, you know, I was kind of curious as to why there wasn't a flat top really available. So I did a little bit of research, and what I discovered is the 455 head, and these are the Stage 1 heads that we have. Of course, they're not done yet. We're going to obviously have to do all the machine work and the hardened seats and everything, and the guides. The Stage 1, or any of the Buick heads rather, they have a really small combustion chamber, which is, and so what they did on the Buicks is they made a really small chamber here, and then they just put dish pistons in it. So this engine is going to be a pump gas engine, which the Stage 1 engines were back in the day, but the pump gas in 71 was a little better than it is now. So we're shooting for right around 9.7 to 1 on this thing, because we want to keep it, you know, reasonable with fuel. We did go with the factory rods on this thing. This is the factory rod, and of course we put new ARP bolts in, and after we put the ARP bolts in, we resized the rods. So and the rods were also cleaned in Magnaflux. The rods turned out really good. No cracks or anything or defects. Resizing the rod consists of shaving the cap and the rod itself before we put the bolts in, and then we put this in a cap grinder, and then of course, and I've got some other videos where we actually show that being done, and then we're going to re-hone this bore out to get rid of any out of round or taper or anything. So these have all been resized and had new ARP bolts and so forth put in them, because we want to bolts that live this deep in the motor. It's a really good idea to change these pretty much every time. We also had the engine balanced. We took it out to the balance shop, and before we put the pistons and rod assemblies together, they balanced the engine. So they weight match the pistons and the connecting rods and so forth. So that stuff has all already been done. We're getting these parts ready to assemble the engine. So let's go back over to the kit here. We of course got Cleveite bearings, and they are 10,000ths under. There's your mains, and then the set of rod bearings. I recommend Cleveite or King bearings. They're really good bearings. The rings are what we call a moly coated top ring, right? These are moly rings, and they are from Sealed Power as well, and they go right along with our pistons. The lifters, of course, we have just a standard hydraulic lifter because we're putting in a hydraulic cam. Now, I don't have the cam here, and the reason I don't have the cam here is because I'm working with a customer on that, and we haven't fully decided whether or not we're going to, well, we haven't decided exactly which cam we're going to go with. So, and then of course our timing set here. This is our timing chain and gear set that we're using on this thing. Now this is an interesting deal here. Now typically, and of course there's Felpro gaskets in here. Always go with Felpro gaskets. They're kind of a standard for the industry. So if you look at this box, I don't know how many of these Buicks you've done, but basically instead of an oil pump in the box, what you get is you get the guts to the oil pump. So we open this thing up here, and there's a bunch of different spring options that they have here, and you kind of got to be careful when you go through the assembly of the pump. And this is basically the innards of the pump. This is your distributor pickup, where the distributor engages with it. This gear goes down into the oil pump, and then it has another gear, of course. It's basically a gear-to-gear pump, just like any other GM pump. And the gears rotate, they mesh, and then they create a low pressure, and you get your flow. Inside of the pump housing is a pressure relief valve, some gaskets, and basically a bunch of different springs that you have to choose from. Now, later on we'll walk through what exactly we need to do to get this pump up and running, but basically what you do with a Buick, instead of just bolting a new pump on, what we're doing is the pump is actually incorporated into the timing cover. This is the timing cover here, and of course we still got to finish cleaning this up and so forth, but we still have the old pump housing and the pressure relief valve and everything on here. And so it's kind of tricky setting this up, getting the right thickness of gasket and making sure that your pump clearances are correct. So down the road, once we get to that point, we'll walk through that. But that's if you're gonna rebuild one of these, just keep in mind the Buick does have an external pump that actually bolts on. It's very similar to a Chrysler. Chrysler big blocks have an external pump too, and they're similar to this. So and then of course the housing incorporates the mechanical fuel pump. I am not totally sure that we're going to use that because it's a classic car restoration. If we don't use this, we will probably just gut it and use it, put it on there as a dummy, because we want the car to look original. And so we may be going with an electric pump, which is a pretty good upgrade. So those are basically the parts that we've gotten for this build. And in the next video that I'm going to be shooting here real quick, we're going to talk about, well, I'm probably going to put the cam bearings and the plugs in this. I don't think you really need to see me do that. All of this stuff that I'm going to do off camera is machine shop stuff, installing the cam bearings and the plugs and all that. That's typically, and boring the block and grinding the crank and so forth. That's typically what the machine shop will do for you. So I have a lot of other videos where you can see that stuff taking place. I don't really want to bore you with duplicating that over and over again every time I make a video. So hopefully you're jazzed about this build. I am. I do a lot of small block Chevys and stuff, and they get a little bit redundant. This is a little bit unique. It's not something that you do every day. It's not something that I've done, a lot of these. An engine is an engine, and I've done a lot of machine work on these things, and I have done some Buick engines, but it's been a while. And so this is kind of a cool build. It's something different, and so hopefully you're into it, because I'm into it, and this is going to be a really cool video. And we'll learn as we go. So, and hopefully by next week I'll have the intake and the cam, and once we get the heads and so forth done and get the lower end together, we can figure out what cam we're going to use and go from there. So we are going to be firing this engine up. That's one of the stipulations on this build, is the customer wants the thing running. So at the end of the build, we'll get this thing running, fired up, and see how it does. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it.